Hey everybody, welcome back to Movies and TV Shows on the Ball. My name is Steve, and on this episode, hey kids, it's Friday night. You know what that means? TGIF. And if you remember the ABC sitcom ABC um, television time slot, TGIF, you remember shows such as Family Matters, Full House, and Step by Step. But one show that I want to talk about is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. It came out in 1993 and lasted till 2000, which surprisingly was only 7 years old, 7-year run. And that show is called Boy Meets World. Now, Boy Meets World was a kind of a television series on ABC uh, that um, that came out right in the early '90s and kind of went through the '90s from, as I said before, '93 to 2000. So I kind of always wanted to kind of cover this show because I grew up in in the '90s. I was a kid and sort of I was I was 5 years old when the series started, and I was uh, 12 years old when the series ended. And what I wanted to do, and so I've been kind of a fan of this show, Boy Meets World, for about um, for years. So I decided, kind of to keep episodes coming in and out. I thought, why don't we do a podcast? Why don't I just do a podcast on uh, Boy Meets World? And if you've followed my channel uh, for a couple years, you know that I've kind of hit teen television, kind of high school television shows, such as episodes of One Tree Hill. I've done Jay and I did a review of 10 Things I Hate About You, which kind of came out in '99, which sort of was right around the same time as when this series was about to end. Then you had my two podcasts on One Tree Hill, which was teen. So this kind of brings it back and to talk about kind of teen shows, but sort of, I kind of grew up, with this show, or like I kind of knew of this show and kind of knew of it. I never really watched it straight through, but I've like caught, I was 12 when the show ended, so I only caught a couple episodes of Boy Meets World on the Disney Channel and ABC Family, which is now known as Freeform. And I do remember actually watching the last episode of the series, and it really hit me hard where he talked about, I do remember them saying, and we'll get to it once we get to the series ending, but he says, Mr. Feeney teaches something. He says, believe in yourselves, try, do good. And so the show pretty much kind of hit me at the right time, and kind of, so I'm kind of, with Disney Plus having the show and kind of, kind of keeping you guys with content, I decided, why don't I just talk about the pilot episode? So what I'm going to do for this episode is kind of give you sort of my thoughts on the first episode, but I'm also going to kind of give you I'm going to start by talking about the plot, or the actors first, then the plot, and then my thoughts on the episode. So here we go. So Boy Meets World, uh, um, So Boy Meets World came out in '93. It's starred. Let me give you the cast and crew first. Just it was created by Mark Jacobs. Mark Jacobs is best known for this show and the sequel series that I didn't mention called Girl Meets World that lasted um, on the Disney Channel for about I think 3 seasons. Yeah, for 3 seasons. But Mark Jacobs has also done work on shows such as um, shows such as not Mark. Michael Jacobs, excuse me, not Mark Jacobs. Michael Jacobs. Michael Jacobs created shows such as he was a producer on the very great uh, movie Quiz Show in 1994. He was the creator of the sitcom My Two Dads that lasted for 3 seasons with Paul Reiser from Mad About You and Aliens and Greg Evangene, who was in BJ and the Bear, and um, he was also the creator of Charles in Charge from 1984 to 1990. He was the writer for. He's also done a lot of short-lived television series such as Lost at Home that lasted 1 season that starred Connie Britton and Aaron Hill and Blake Clark, who was the voice of Slinky. He's done work in other than Boy Meets World. He did the story writing for a TV movie called Wild Grizzly. He also created a television show called You Wish about a single mother reluctantly accepting the services of a genie who's been imprisoned imprisoned in a magic carpet for 2,000 years, and it only lasted 1 season. So he's done that and had it showed Jerry Van Dyke and Joan Allies as well. He's written. He was the creator of the Dinosaurs, which was a Disney, I think ABC Disney show about dinosaurs. If you remember Earl St. Clair, I think you can watch episodes of Dinosaurs on Disney Plus as well. He's also did work on shows such as Singers and Songs. He's in a lot of television shows. But one of his success, this and Charles in Charge is one of his biggest successes. Then you had, your stars. You had Ben Savage. Ben Savage is best known for pretty much Boy Meets World. He plays Corey Matthews. He returned back to the show in the sequel series Girl Meets World, which we'll get to. His works include he was in Little Monster. He played. He has an older brother named Fred Savage who was in the Wonder Years, but Fred Savage was in shows. He was in a movie called Little Monster, where I think Ben Savage played his little brother, brother. He was in his works, which was his first role. He showed up again in an episode of The Wonder Years. He was in a TV series called Dear John from 1988 to 1990. He was in a television show called A Family for Joe that lasted 10 episodes with Robert Mitchum, who played, who was in Robert Mitchum, and he was also in um, episodes of Party of Five. He's been in Swimming Upstream, episodes of Still Standing. 2005, he was in a show called, in a Disney Channel show, Phil of the Future. He was recently in 2008, well, not recently, but his most current episodes or shows were Chuck in 2008. He was in episodes of Bones in 2011. He was in a television movie. He was in a movie called Girl Meets Boy with Jake Busey and Anna Field from episodes of Las Vegas and Two and a Half Men. And so he's done a lot of that. He showed up in Girl Meets World, which lasted 3 seasons. He was in The Leftovers for HBO. He was in a TV actually lasted 2 seasons on CMT called Still the King with Billy Ray Cyrus. He was in an episode of Speechless, episodes of Criminal Minds, Homeland. He was in the Hallmark Hanukkah movie, Love Lights Hanukkah, and he's recently, last year, he was in a TV movie called Girl in the Shed, the kidnapping of Abby Hernandez, which was a Lifetime movie apparently. So that's him. Then you had Ryder Strong. Ryder Strong was other than playing Sean Hunter, he was in the Cabin Fever 2, Spring Fever. He was in the television series Veronica Mars. He played from season 3, episode 2. He actually did voice work for Kim Possible. His other works include right after Boy Meets World ended, he was in an episode of Law and Order: Criminal Intent. He was in I think I said that, he played Paul in Cabin Fever. He actually voiced Bobby in Batman Beyond, which when we get to Eric, the guy who played Eric, he was the voice of Terry McGinnis, who plays Batman, or plays Terry McGinnis, who plays the new Batman, which we discussed in our episode, in our DC extravaganza. If you remember, I mentioned that he played Will Freddy, who was the voice of Terry McGinnis in Batman Beyond. He was also in The Practice. and My Giant, to name a few. So you probably know where he's from. Then you had William Daniels. William Daniels played Mr. Feeney. Um, Mr. Feeney is, or other things you may remember him from is he played Dr. Mark Craig in St. Elsewhere. He was uh, the um, he was Ben Braddock's father in The Graduate as um, as who was Mr. Braddock in The Graduate, who was Dustin Hoffman's father. So that's where I knew, and I do remember watching that movie, The Graduate, in film class, and going, "God, he looks a lot like Mr. Feeney," and he happened to be. His other big role include he was the voice of Kit in Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff. Um, he played um, in an episode of Touched by an Angel. He was in episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Um, he was in. He revoiced the character in Knight Rider 2000 as Kit in 1991. But he's had a pretty long filmography. He's actually done 160 titles according to uh, IMDb, and he is 90. He's 95 years old now, and he's still, his last performance was in 2020 in a movie called Superintelligence with Melissa McCarthy and Bobby Carnival, who was the stepdad in Ant-Man. So he's still been doing work, but he plays George Feeney, and who is Corey's teacher, and then I think later in the series becomes Corey's principal. Then you had the parents. Let's start with Alan Matthews, who's played by William Rust. William Rust is best known for his roles such as, I've known him as Alan, but he was in episodes of Young and the Restless in 2009. He's a pretty worked actor. He was in an episode of Boston Legal. He was in a couple episodes of Boston Legal as A.D. Christopher Palmer. He was in an episode of CSI. He was in an episode of Numbers with our 10 Things I Hate About You friend and Santa Claus, David Krumholtz. He was in episodes of he was in episodes of Sopranos. He was in episodes of The West Wing, NYPD Blue, JAG, CSI New York, Deadwood, episodes of Dragnet with Ed O'Neill, and he was also in episodes of Ally McBeal, and his films include American History X, and he hasn't done a lot of film work. Like movies wise, but he actually did. He did in 2017. He did an episode of Grimm, and his latest episode, he's been in that television series Animal Kingdom for TNT, is where he's recently been in. But he plays Alan Alan Matthews, um, and then you had uh, Amy Matthews, the mother. Amy Matthews is played by Betsy Randall. Betsy Randall was in uh, she was in the movie The Nightmare Room. Her other works include she was in season 7, or actually in a couple seasons of Charmed as Miss Weatherboon. Uh, she's been in episodes of Home Improvement, which she showed up in season 2 of that show. Um, she was in episodes of Baywatch in 1989, and she was in episodes of Family Ties, to name a few. Her most recent work, she returned a lot with a lot of the other cast members, returned back in the sequel series Girl Meets World. So we'll hit that later. But her latest film was Painter in 2020, which was actually her first kind of top billing starring role. Um, and she plays Amy Matthews. Then you had Eric Matthews. Oh, okay, I already did that one. Excuse me. Then you had um, Topanga Lawrence, played by Danielle Fisher. Danielle Fisher has been in movies such as Boiling Point. She was in a movie called Gamebox 1.0. It's about a guy who has to escape about a video game tester who has to escape reality by playing a mysterious 3D fantasy game he received in the mail. And she actually was uh, was top billing for that movie. She's been in episodes of Yes Dear. She was in the TV series Nikki with Nikki Cox. Other than Boy Meets World, she was in Harry and the Hendersons, which was a TV series based on the John Lithgow movie that lasted for about 3 seasons, but it starred Bruce Davison, who you know as Senator Kelly from X-Men, and he was also in the only movie I've seen him. I mean, he's a workable actor and he's been in a lot of things, but the movie that other than X-Men where I know him from, he was in Summer Catch um, with Jessica Biel and um, Jessica Biel. Excuse me, Fever Pitch is the film with Drew Barrymore and Jimmy Fallon. It's actually called Summer Catch with Freddie Prinze Jr. and Jessica Biel and Matthew Lillard. So there was a connection, and with Scooby Doo. So there you go. Um, he was also in. She was also in. She also did episodes of Full House as well, which was her first role. Then you had Morgan Matthews, played by Lindsay Ridgway. She was in films such as she played Darla Dimple in the underrated Warner Brothers film Cats Don't Dance. She was in episodes of Star Trek Voyager. She was in the Sonic the Hedgehog animated series that with Jaleel White. So with Urkel, she was in episodes of Star Trek Voyager. She showed back. She showed back up in season 3 of Girl Meets World, and she's also did voice work for the uh, television series, the television series Totally Spies as well. So she plays Morgan, the youngest, the third child in the show, and the Matthews family. Excuse me. Then you had, and oh, there. Um, so that's pretty much it for the first. Uh, for the first episode, and let's get to the pilot. So here we go. So the pilot opens up with Corey and Mr. Feeney in the cafeteria. It's the start of the morning, and Corey is getting, and this is kind of where we see Corey and um, Mr. Feeney's relationship start, or we kind of get to understand how their relationship is coming into. So they start talking about. So they're kind of sitting in the cafeteria, and they start talking about how late they stayed up by the duration of how long they watched the, I guess, a late night show. I'm guessing it was a show like The Tonight Show or something, and he kind of says, I stayed up, first guest, first monologue, first guest, first sketch. I stayed up, first sketch, monologue, second sketch, and then I think Sean stayed up the longest. And they were like, whoa! And so, but then they kind of go to class. We have the credits, and we're then in the classroom, and so the credits roll. They're in the classroom, and they're talking about Romeo and Juliet, and Corey but like what I love about it is he's kind of teaching them to play, and one of the classmates is lying down, and he says to the classmate who's played by um, I think Cameron's Cameron's best friend in Father of the Bride. He was also in his character's name is Chauncey Leopardi. Chauncey Leopardi is best known as Michael Squints, the kid who basically drowned or faked drowning in the pool and ended up making out with the lifeguard in the Sandlot. He was also Cameron, who was in Father of the Bride. He was Maddie's best friend in Father of the Bride. He was in an episode. He was also in the Cancel Too Soon series Freaks and Geeks, to name a few. But so they're talking, and then he goes over to. So Corey after they talk about the sketch, they go to Corey goes to the vending machine and gets a candy bar. Mr. Feeney sees him getting the candy bar, and he says, "You got a candy bar? Doesn't your mother feed you?" And he says, uh, uh, and he says, "Yeah, but I need to get that shredded wheat out of my systems." And he says, "You know, there's a line where he's like, he says, there's no gravity in space, Mr. Matthews. Therefore, astronauts suck up. Learn from them," because basically he was saying something about how he was trying to get the taste of shredded wheat out of his system. And let's see. So anyway, so basically that sort of starts it out, and they go to class and they say, it's 3 more hours till lunch. So we're in the classroom, and they're going over Romeo and Juliet, and this and he teaches it, and I like how he he teaches kind of he's like going, you know he's teaching the scene in Shakespeare, in I guess Romeo and Juliet, where it's like, take the knife and stab at thee, and he said, and the kid says, "Mr. Feeney, I'd rather not." And then as he's teaching them about um, Romeo and Juliet, Corey and Sean are in the back of the room, and Corey is trying to hide his earpiece to listen to the Phillies game. And Sean's kind of asking how they're doing when Mr. Feeney walks by and says, and basically Corey is basically saying what, kind of basically giving him the play-by-play of the game. Mr. Feeney walks by, as I said, and he basically kind of says, "Oh, in a comical way, he says, "Oh, this is my hearing aid," and then Mr. Feeney uh, ends up confiscating the uh, Walkman, and starts giving him kind of a play-by-play about a home run, and you can kind of see how, and it's really cool. What's really funny is, or really interesting is, he's like saying, John takes, or he's like play-by-play, and he hits. Then when he swings, and he talks about, he hits the ball and it's going, and he clicks off the tape recorder, and he wants these kids to focus on Romeo and Juliet. And Corey kind of states that, he says, "Why should I care about about a guy who kills himself over some dumb girl?" And Mr. Feeney says, it's all about the consuming power of love and how it affects us and gives. And he kind of, for his kind of smart mouth, he ends up giving him detention. Then we're introduced to Eric Matthews, played. We find out he is a sophomore, and he just got a date with a girl named Heather, and it bursts his bubble that, because Corey wanted to go to knew they were going wanted to go as the with Eric as brothers to the Phillies game that Friday night, and that game's the most important game of the year. But Eric bursts his bubble and says his date with Heather is Friday, and Corey, and he kind of says he kind of Eric basically weeds out Corey to take Heather to the game, and this kind of devastates Corey.
But we find out that Amy has found out that Corey has detention with Mr. Feeney because of. We kind of find out that Corey pretty much feels like he feels that the fact that going to the Phillies game is sort of a brother bonding moment, kind of brother bonding moment. That's their kind of thing, if you will. And with Eric taking Heather on the date, would kind of ruins their special bond together. But as I said, unfortunately, Amy and Alan find out that Corey has detention with Mr. Feeney. And she's like, how do you know that? And Amy says, because Mr. Feeney told me while I was getting my groceries, when I was bringing in the groceries. And Alan asked him, asked him, why'd you get detention? And Corey says, well, I want to move. Amy says Corey wants to move, and Amy says Corey would rather listen to a baseball game than learn the complex story of Romeo and Juliet. And Corey, I feel like, kind of having his parents against him, he feels like, this was sort of a kind of Eric's fault. Because of Eric getting a date he wants. Corey tries to use reverse psychology, but it doesn't work. And Corey tries to get his dad on his side for the tickets, but Alan says, Corey basically says, Dad, Dad, shouldn't it be the fact that he's my brother, that he gave me the tickets? And Alan says Eric bought those tickets, and he basically has the right to take whoever he wants. But Corey feels like, because he's his brother, and he uses this idea that because he slept in the same room with him for 11 years, that he kind of deserves to get the tickets. But Eric pretty much is still sort of smitten on taking his date named. He's still smitten on taking Heather to the game. So the next day, Corey feels like the odd man out at lunch. Corey lets Sean and Nicholas, who's played by Chauncey Laporte, Michael Spritz, Parducci, so Chancey Leopardi, who played Michael Spitz from The Sandlot. If you know who that character is, he was the kid with the glasses who basically fakes drowning at the pool in that scene in The Sandlot, and ends up kissing the lifeguard. I don't know if you remember that scene, but that's where you know him from. And there's and also he was also was the and Cameron's best friend from Father of the Bride is where you know him. So anyway, and recently he was in an episode of Freaks and Geeks. So he basically tells him that he dumped his family, and Corey says that so since he's dumped his family, he decides that he's going to play hooky this Friday and go to the game, or try to go to the game and scout for tickets. And so, but and then scout for tickets. Corey goes to ask Mr. Feeney to talk about getting out of detention. And so he goes up to him and says, he goes up to him and says, he basically tells Corey that, this is my lunch period, this is where this is my freedom from children, pretty much. And he says, excuse me, and a woman shows up a woman teacher named Evelyn shows up, and they sit down to have lunch together. Evelyn is played by Cynthia Mace. Cynthia Mace is best known for her roles such as she's been in the television series Succession recently. She was in an episode of the TV series The Blacklist in 2019. She has been in episodes of ER, episodes of Dinosaurs, and episodes of Head of the Class, and she was in one episode of Murphy Brown. She also was in one episode of the original series of 21 Jump Street. So that's her. I just like to give a little shout out. So she sits down and she sort of starts to talk to Corey.
And who is this young man? My name's Corey Matthews. Mr. Feeney's my teacher.
And Corey introduces himself and tells Evelyn that Mr. Feeney's his teacher and he hates. But the teacher Evelyn says that I'm sure Mr. Feeney doesn't hate you. Then that night, Corey decides to live in his treehouse, and Amy brings him basically dinner for the treehouse, including chicken. Brings him chocolate pie, side of chicken, and corn on the cob. And then I like that they make a joke where she does say, I would buy you a plant, but you're in a tree. And then she Amy asks Corey, how are you doing? And he says, I'm doing fine. And he's like but you've never been, I'm doing fine, I've stayed in this treehouse for 100 times. And she's like, well, never after dark. And so Amy leaves, and Corey brings him chocolate pie, side of chicken, and corn on the cob. And then I like that they make a joke where she does say, I would buy you a plant, but you're in a tree. And then Amy asks Corey, how are you doing? And he says, I'm doing fine. And he's like but you've never been, I'm doing fine. I've stayed in this treehouse for 100 times. And she's like, well, never after dark. And so Amy leaves, and Corey starts eating his dinner when he looks. And Morgan shows up the way to Mr. Feeney's house. Asks Corey if she wants her doll to keep her company. And he says, why would I want your stupid doll to keep me company? And she was like, she does something very sisterly and kind of helps him out with, he kind of takes it as sort of a charitable thing. And then Corey gets his dinner and starts eating his chicken when he looks out of the treehouse to see Mr. Feeney setting a candlelight dinner for a potential date, he assumes. And then setting up candlelight dinner, and you see him get a phone call that Evelyn has to cancel, we assume. Cancel their date. He puts up the secondary plates and eats alone. The next morning, Corey sneaks into the house to get his underwear and says, I'm going back to the treehouse. And Amy shows up and takes a kind of the Nintendo gun and says, who are you and what are you doing? And drop my son's underwear. And he says, Mom, it's me. And then let's see him if he feels a little. And Amy kind of says, do you feel sort of abandoned by your brother? And Corey is like, yeah, but life goes on. And Amy says, well, that in a way, Corey has been abandoning his father. Corey says, wait a minute, I've never abandoned Dad. And he says, oh yes. Says, when you were little, you couldn't wait for your dad to come home to throw the football around with him. And he looked forward to it as much as Corey did. And Corey asked, why did we not do that anymore? And Amy says, well, you got a little bit older and you started hanging out with your friends.
Or do it as much as you do.
And
so how come we don't do that so much anymore? Well, you got a little old.
And you're hanging out with your friends.
You had a bunch of friends.
You were more interested in throwing football around with them.
It sounds like you're saying I'm the bad
And then Corey kind of takes offense to it because he thinks he's the bad guy about it. And she's like, wait a minute, there's no bad guy.
All I'm saying is that it's natural.
And she's just saying that it's natural, but she's also saying that it's natural for that people priorities change and they sometimes grow apart.
And priorities change, okay?
Or I wouldn't change, but they grow up. Then. Why did you not throw the? Okay, and she says it's natural for people to grow up and priorities change. And then we get to the next day after school, where Corey is sitting in detention with Mr. Feeney, and Mr. Feeney is just in silence, just kind of grading papers. Um, um, and detention. He says to Mr. Feeney that he's been sitting there for 38 minutes, and he says he's been very good, and he gets up and sneaks his way to the doorway while Mr. Feeney is still grading papers, and he kind of narrates it. And he gets to the doorway and he says, "Come on, Mr. Feeney." He's been sitting in the seat for 38 minutes, and he says he should let me go. He narrates that he's about to leave, and then he kind of feels like, well, uh, he says, good, and he sneaks, and why he walking to the door, going to the hall, he complains about detention and why it stinks. Then Corey says, "Why should I stay here? Because I don't want to hear about this love stuff." And he continues to say that it will just lead to no good. And Mr. Feeney, he kind of says to Mr. Feeney that, "Why should I stay here and listen to this love stuff? Because I know it's not going to lead to no good." And Mr. Feeney says, and he kind of says, he asks Mr. Feeney that he kind of knows that he agrees with him. And then he basically blabs out that he saw Mr. Feeney, he says that he and Mr. Feeney had dinner together. And, and he says, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, I had dinner in my treehouse. I had chicken and rice, and you had draws that he was in his treehouse looking over his neighbors, Mr. Feeney's window. Mr. Feeney asks, "How does he knew?" And Corey says, "Because I slept in my treehouse last night." And Corey feels like the whole Romeo and Juliet, or he says he slept in his treehouse last night. That I had chocolate pie and you had salad for two all by yourself. And Mr. Feeney's a little taken aback that he actually spied on Mr. Feeney's dinner. And he says, "How did you know that?" Because I slept in Feeney's dinner. As you know, the reason why is that this whole love stuff has torn my family against me, and it stinks, he says. And you're teaching us how it's worth killing yourself over when I know you don't realize and believe it, do you? And Mr. Rennie I like how Mr. Rennie puts his pen down, and he basically says, believe it. And then Mr. Feeney gives his lecture talking about how since you're 11 years old, Shakespeare wrote plays and sonnets. Emily Dickinson, the Greeks wrote tragedies and comedies. Robert Burns, Emily Dickinson, the Brownings, examining the depths of human emotion. And you know what they all have in common, he says, is that they were all older than 11. And then Shakespeare and the Greeks who wrote, Corey says comedically that they all took your class, and he says no, every one of them was older than 11. And then I like this scene because Mr. Feeney basically kind of stands there and he questions his thoughts on teaching, and if he taught Corey anything at the beginning and ending, anything from the beginning to the ending of every school year. And then he sits and he says,
and he sits him down and he says, Corey, I am going to teach you something from him. So Mr. Feeney gets very candid with Corey about how he lives next door to Corey, and he kind of sees what Corey has as a family and the great individuals they are, but their real strength is because coming from the family. In their house, there is no greater aspiration than to have love in our lives. Romeo knew it and died for it, and those who don't know it will sit in detention for the rest of their lives. After lives. And
human emotions. And do you know
dismisses him from detention. And then we kind of get sort of the family ending of the show, where Corey sneaks in from the treehouse to grab some underwear and other clothes, and he sneaks in to get back to his house, and he tells Morgan that, don't tell you anything. Dad, I'm moving back in. And Morgan says, Corey's back. And then he runs into Alan, the dad, and let's see, and he's caught by his dad, and Corey just kind of apologizes for dumping him for his friends, which kind of goes back to what Amy kind of told him about. But Alan kind of likes the fact that Corey still has friends, and he's also glad he's back, and he gives him a hug. Is up in his room playing Nintendo with most likely Duck Hunt, because he has, if you remember, if you're a 90s kid or 80s kid, you remember the Nintendo laser gun that you used to kill ducks on Duck Hunt. And as he's shooting the screen, he goes over to, or Eric kind of comes in and wants to kind of talk to him. And Corey's playing video games, shooting ducks, saying "die, die, die." He shoots his Nintendo gun at his brother, and stops playing. And Corey asks Eric how the game went, and Eric says, "Well, the game was fine, but unfortunately, the date didn't go so good. Heather, quote unquote, his date, who we don't see, had a great date. She knew what to say and knew what to say. She knew what to talk about. She was funny." He tells Corey he messed up by he tripped over his chair, spilled food, and had nothing to talk about for 9 innings. Corey says, "You're much too cool to be, and I think it's sort of that idea that I think for a younger brother to look up to your older brother is, you have that aspiration for your older brother that, he is cool in a way." And Eric kind of says, "Newsflash, I am not cool." And he says, "I'm not cool." Says, he gives the score that the Phillies are in the playoffs because they scored 5-3, and Corey Eric says, he tells Corey that he didn't have a great date, and he says,
he messed up. He tripped over chairs, spilled food, and had nothing to talk about for 9 endings. Corey says, you're much too cool for some girl. And Eric says, newsflash, I'm not cool. And he never wants to see Heather again. Corey ends up grabbing the phone and hands it to Eric. And he doesn't know what to talk about. Corey suggests a movie, and Eric asks him, why do you want me to call her? And he said, I thought that love was worth it. Going back to the Romeo and Juliet thing. And then Corey goes downstairs to have tea with his sister. And he kind of says, no, and he has this kind of sweet moment with Morgan where he kind of says, no matter how old you get, I still want to have tea with you. And then Amy shows up her mom shows up with laundry and tells Megan it's time for bed. And Megan kind of says, why don't you, Morgan says, why don't you let Corey take me, put me to bed? And Corey says, I'll do it.
Why not? It was a great game.
It's not how.
And he goes and has tea with Morgan and then puts her to bed. And then the credits end, or during the credits, there's a twist to the story in the cafeteria. Feeney and Evelyn to dinner, and he said that, and we think that Corey thinks that Feeney got stood up by Evelyn, and he asked Evelyn to dinner. He said that the other night he had to cancel dinner reservations with his sister. Corey looks confused. Mr. Feeney asked him, why is he confused? Why is he confused? As it should be. End of episode. So that was the pilot for Boy Meets World. I know it's a little bit long, but I wanted to kind of get you into what I wanted to say. I like this episode. I like the dynamics. Sean doesn't really play that big of a role, but we kind of get the fact that he's with his friends, and it's more, which is the dynamic between Mr. Feeney and Corey, and how they are this sort of nemesis kind of thing, but not nemesis, but sort of, good nature, and he kind of gives words of wisdom. And I think this is a pretty good start to a pilot. I think the show probably gets better after probably episode 6. Or I don't want to say better, but improves. This is a pretty good pilot to start off the show. I feel like I give it pretty much an A+. So that an A+, A+. I thought it, it really kind of starts it and kind of sees where we're gonna go in the next 7 years with Boy Meets World. So as a pilot, I'll give it a 7, and as a Boy Meets World semi fan, I'll give it a 9. I thought it did pretty good as a show. So that's that for Boy Meets World. Coming up next, we'll probably be doing a podcast on I think Jay and I will go back and be doing some other shows. So that's just a little bit simple. Anyway, signing off. I'm Steve. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe. Bye.